Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking some Arizona State with the Sun Devils, of course, coming off that huge win at home on Saturday night against Michigan State, down to the wire 16-13. We bring on Jordan Kay. You can catch him on the Rivals platform for Arizona State athletics. That would be Devil's Digest. Jordan, how you doing tonight?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. That keeps us going here at Mark Rogers TV. And again, you can catch Jordan at Devil's Digest. Wow. Well, this is a game that we talked about a few times during the offseason as well. It's Big Bad Michigan State from the Big Ten. They finished in the top 15. They're typically in that group of teams in the country. And 10-3 last season. And Arizona State, despite winning 7, getting to a bowl game last year, there were skeptics out there because of the coaching change and because of personnel losses in certain areas, and not thinking that this team could compete in the Pac-12 South. And we talked about it before we started to record here, Jordan, that as we got closer to game time, I think that particular week, was considered to be a Michigan State win. Kind of just check it in the checkbox, became more of a competitive nature. And then, of course, as Arizona State pulls it off.
Yeah, I know it's kind of weird how things change so quickly after just 1 week. I think people really realize that the 3-3-5 defense that Arizona State has kind of started to use once Danny Gonzalez, the defensive coordinator, came over from San Diego State. It gives a lot of team fits because most teams don't ever see that. And so once they kind of it's a defense that usually takes longer than 3 days to prepare for. UTSA, ASU held them to just 2 yards on the ground, and then Michigan State, they held them to 63 yards on the ground. And I think that's one of the things that can really stymie offenses, no matter how good they are, because they really just haven't seen it. And I think that's one thing that Michigan State really was unprepared for. And I think one of the things that, and one of the reasons why people were starting to favor Arizona State closer to game time.
Yeah, it was a situation where I wasn't surprised by the outcome, wasn't surprised about the game flow. I did pick Michigan State, but when I saw that line at 6, I figured, okay, Arizona State seems to be like a good choice here from a point spread perspective. What was talked about after the game in regards to Herm Edwards' outlook on what transpired on the field? Obviously, the scene looked pretty rabid compared to what we've seen in recent years at Arizona State in regards to the fans, the alumni, the students being up for a big game.
Yeah, it was the blackout. It got over 50,000 fans, which was pretty impressive considering the turnout that ASU's had the last few years. And I think it was very interesting because this was really the first true test of the Herm Edwards era at ASU. They were in a tight game, down going into the fourth quarter, and it was kind of one of those things like, let's see how they make in-game adjustments. Let's see how ASU and Herm Edwards can really handle the clock and handle adjustments, and they did an unbelievable job. The offensive coordinator, Rob Likens, is up in the booth, a change from previous years that ASU has had, and he was saying that some of the wide receivers like Frank Darby and obviously N'Keal Harry, they were getting on the headsets and they were calling him, and at halftime they were telling him exactly what they were seeing from the Michigan State defense, and they kind of set up the game-winning touchdown. ASU has 2 different types of deep balls they can throw. One's just a straight go ball, and the other one is kind of a back shoulder much farther downfield. And at halftime, N'Keal Harry went up to Coach Likens and kind of told him, hey, I don't know if I can get by him, but make sure you throw that back shoulder. And N'Keal and Manny Wilkins, the quarterback, have worked on that play hundreds of times in practice and after practice, and they threw it up when they needed it, and they went and got it. But the Herm Edwards part of this is very interesting because at the end of the game, ASU had the ball with about 4.5 minutes left. It was a tie game, and they're marching downfield, your typical 4-minute drill. But they get right around the 10-yard line with about 2.5 minutes to go. And Michigan State had kind of burned their timeouts by this point. And Herm Edwards is kind of played this as perfectly as you could have possibly played it. The offensive coordinator, Rob Likens, he was saying after the game that they wanted to go. He wanted to go for it. He was trying to call in plays for or run the ball right up the middle. Mark D'Antonio said after the game that he was going to let them score if they did. But Herm was saying, no, I've been burned by that. I've seen people get burned by that too many times. We should never have our defense come back on the field after that. So he got one more first down, milked the clock. Manny Wilkins took 3 straight knees, and then the kicker, Brandon Reese, came on, made a 28-yarder. And it was just the most perfect clock management, late game situation. For someone that hasn't coached in so long, it was very impressive to see that he was able to decipher things so quickly, be able to have his guys in such a mindset that they knew exactly what to do, the situation, and it was very flawless and very impressive from Edwards and the staff late game.
We've got Jordan Kay on the line from Devil's Digest. It's the Rivals platform for Arizona State athletics. Of course, the Sun Devils now on the radar. They beat Michigan State at home. They're 2-0. And they got one more game against San Diego State before they dive into Pac-12 play. So an interesting situation here, because this is a team that and a program that garnished all sorts of criticisms and skepticism, myself included, not necessarily criticism, but I need to see this. I need to wait and see whether this is going to work out. It's only 2 games, but they did beat a very quality opponent here in Michigan State. And even with the Texas San Antonio game, there were signs of this being a very solid system and this team being prepared for 2018, unlike what many people said. So, Jordan, what you just outlined is fascinating to me from the standpoint that we had the conversations, and I certainly took off on it myself, because from what I've seen of Herm Edwards as an NFL coach, that was not his strong suit.
Yeah.
His strong suit was motivating a team, inspiring young men, getting them to play well, be fired up, be ready to play, be focused, be disciplined. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of managing a game, clock management, I had gone through a litany of games in which he blew it.
Yeah.
So he has either learned a lot or surrounded him with the right people in place to do that, because like you, and I'm sure that you were very much more focused on it. I was watching the game, but just as taking in a good game. But it did hit me that, well, there's 2.5 minutes and they're at the 10-yard line. So certainly Michigan State's going to have time to come back and drive it down the field. Yeah. And then I hadn't done the math of the plays and the timeouts and the whole thing. And then once it started to unfold, I was thinking, they are playing this to perfection. How have they eliminated 2.5 minutes of the game sitting at the 10-yard line?
Yeah.
It was truly masterful. It really was. You don't see that very often with that kind of game time left on the clock and that position on the field.
Yeah. He had a comment Monday that kind of sparked some odd reactions on Twitter. And it was one of these things. Someone asked him the question, like, what's different about coaching in pro football and coaching in college football? And his response was, I think college coaches they get too caught up in scoring points. And he said, that's not always what it's about. And I think that's where they go wrong sometimes. And people flipped out. They were going, this guy, how did this guy beat Mark D'Antonio in Michigan State? And, I don't think he understands how football works. It's like, well, he was talking about this situation right here where you don't really just need to go score points. It's more of a mental game, and there's different situations that you can play out. And I'm not going to lie, I really do think that those 9 years working at ESPN and just watching games every day and seeing how different coaches approach situations and seeing how coaches messed up situations, I think that's very beneficial. And he was talking that he's been showing the team just other situations of where teams have messed up and of where they've gone wrong and said, we can't do this. And apparently the same situation came up from a team, I think last week, where they did the same thing. And instead of taking the knee, they went and ran it in the end zone, and then they got beat. And he's like, that's just dumb. We don't need to do that. I think the Colorado-Nebraska game, the same thing happened where Nebraska scored pretty quick after they got the ball, and Colorado marched right down the field and had a few lucky penalties, but ended up winning the game. And I think that just shows you 2 different ways to play a situation, and Edwards had the correct approach.
And it seems systematic, but it also seems somewhat simple, but it's not, because you're not playing chess. You've got athletes out on the field, and there's 22 moving parts, and you want them to be aggressive. And so there's a margin for error there as well. So you want to be smart but aggressive at the same time, and you have to understand. So to your point, you see situations where a team's protecting a lead or there's a tie game and they go ahead and score too early.
Yeah.
And then the other team comes down and scores. And basically, even if you've extended a lead, if you don't extend it past 8 points, then basically you put the game in the hands of the other team, and they can score, they can onside kick. You may never see the ball again, depending on the situation. But if you don't play it properly, where coaches get burned on the flip side is that you may fumble, you may have a bad exchange, you may have a missed field goal or a bad snap on a field goal or something happen in which you've set up this situation and it doesn't. So you really need to play a lot into it. So I will compare this situation that was played, I'm assuming, in perfect weather, perfect field conditions, to what the Cleveland Browns did yesterday or 2 days ago, in which they were too conservative in a situation in which there was a 30-mile-an-hour wind and driving rainstorm, and they're counting on a 43-yard field goal as being automatic. No, you've got 30 or 40 seconds. The odds of you turning it over to where the Steelers are going to march at 80 yards for a touchdown are almost zero. So get yourself closer for a field goal. Don't assume you can make a 43-yarder in a driving rainstorm. So all that has to be taken into consideration. Plus, you have athletes on the field that you may know the right thing to do, and you're trying to communicate that to them, but you've got to get all of them on the same page. So it's rather complicated, and it was perfectly done, and it was pretty fascinating to see that out of Herm Edwards, him pressed into that kind of situation almost right out of the gate. First important game that his team has to play, and he's faced with that, and he succeeds. Manny Wilkins missed some throws, played a pretty decent game, but missed some throws downfield that might have opened up the game. Just your thoughts about Manny Wilkins' play.
I think they're always going to take those shots, whether they're hitting or not. They were saying that they're just going to, they only need one of them to hit, so they're going to keep going after them. And I think that's the thing with, he just sometimes will just lob it a little too far, a little too much. I don't exactly know the reason for that. It could just be a bad touch on the ball that given night. But I think that's one of their things the offense is predicated is they got to take those shots. They can't just play it conservatively. They're going to go take those shots because they have threats downfield like Frank Darby and obviously N'Keal Harry, who they can get the ball to at any time. And it's not like they're solely reliant on those shots. Obviously, that's kind of how they got the scoring going. But they have other ways. They can just toss the ball out, quick slant to N'Keal, a couple yards to Kyle Williams, or do some screen passes to the running backs like Eno Benjamin. But yeah, it's definitely something going forward that Manny's going to have to clean up, is those deep shots downfield, because the offense is it's built to get a few of them a game. And if none of them come, that's a problem. After the game, Rob Likens was saying they're going to keep taking them no matter what. It's just kind of a hope and prayer that one comes before the 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter.
So we've got Jordan K on the line from Devil's Digest. You can hear the insight from him right there. So it's a good read at Rivals. So check him out right there. Of course, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, where we bring on the very best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry, like Jordan himself. We've got a number of people on the live chat. I don't see anything there in particular, but if you have any particular questions or comments on Arizona State football, I will pass them on to Jordan. But certainly I have enough to ask about this football team after witnessing that game against Michigan State, because it just turns the narrative completely around to what we thought it was initially, and not to make too much out of it. Michigan State's really good. They're not great. They have their issues as well, but they're a good program, obviously. And I even think that this team's going to be fine. Fine, meaning not contending for a national title, but they'll do their 8-4 most likely in the Big Ten and be just fine. We talked about Manny Wilkins, 30 of 48, 380 yards. So the lack of a running game, was that more Michigan State, do you believe, forcing Wilkins to go to the air? Or do you really have to address this area in terms of the running backs that were lost? As we know, Richard and Balaj gone, and some inexperience there.
No, I really do think it was Michigan State. Their front is so much bigger than what ASU faced with UTSA and even what ASU faces in practice every day. That's a thing where they have a pretty good running back in Eno Benjamin, who had a phenomenal first week. And they also have a shifty kind of change of pace guy with Isaiah Floyd, who's more of a get outside type thing. But they'll try and get the running backs involved other ways too. And that's the thing that doesn't show up on the rushing stats. But when ASU kind of needed it most in the fourth quarter on that game-winning drive, they tossed one little quick out on a 3rd and 10 to Eno, and he ran up the field on like a 5-yard pass, ended up going right around 28 yards. And so they'll get them involved other ways, and I think that's really going to show itself this week because they've seen the 3-3-5 every day in practice, and they kind of know how to exploit it. Isaiah Floyd was saying that it's kind of all about patience of just waiting to get to the line and then finding what the defense gives you and going that way. But yeah, it definitely wasn't encouraging against Michigan State. And I also think that's because they weren't playing with a lead. So they were more inclined to have to take those deep shots and have to throw the ball. And it was a lot of 3 and outs, which really didn't give the offense any room for error in terms of running the ball and trying to get things going and getting Eno into a rhythm and letting the offense kind of develop that way. It was more of, we have to come from behind, so we got to keep throwing the ball. But yeah, I don't think it's too much of a concern going forward. If it keeps happening after 1, 2, 3 weeks, then I think there's a little panic, but I don't think that's set in even close to yet.
Arizona State football talk with the Sun Devils coming off a monumental win over Michigan State at home, 16-13, a game in which during the offseason forecasts from many, no one that I saw chalk this up as a win for Arizona State. It was pretty much just a given. Michigan State's going to win that game. Arizona State moves on to Pac-12 play, and hopefully they can beat San Diego State and win their other games non-conference. So before we move on to the Aztecs and some interesting storylines that you have there, offensive line changes this week.
Yeah. So right guard Stephen Miller did not play against Michigan State. In his place was Roy Hemsley, a transfer from USC, actually, a redshirt junior. And so the coaches liked so much what Hemsley did that they're actually moving him over to left guard where he practices at, but he's usually with the second teamers on practice. But they liked him so much that they actually said he's going to start. And the original starter, Alex Lasoya, is going to go to right behind Hemsley. And then they did say that Stephen Miller is back. So they're going to have a fully equipped offensive line for the first time, this first time since in 2 weeks. I think that's really going to help them, especially against such a veteran team in San Diego State and having guys that have gone against the 3-3-5 every day in practice and know exactly what to do and how to change. I think that's going to be very important, and I think you'll see a lot better run game. That's also another reason that the run game I don't think was as good because there are holes on the offensive line with some inexperiences, especially at left guard. So I think that's really gonna help this week.
Jordan Kay's on the line from Devil's Digest. It's the Rifles platform for Arizona State. Of course, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please like, comment, subscribe. That helps out our platform as we try to give you the best college football discussion, debate, and analysis that you're going to find anywhere. Talking up the Sun Devils with a date against San Diego State coming up next week on the road. ASU lost at home against the Aztecs last year. San Diego State also beat Stanford last year, lost to the Cardinal this year. So Arizona State hoping that trend continues. We got running back Juwan Washington. He had a big night, at least in the first half against Stanford. Yeah. And I see he hit up Sacramento State for 156 yards in a 28-14 game. So there's a connection there in regards to the coaching staff. So why don't you lay that out for us with the game coming up on Saturday?
Yeah, so in the offseason when Edwards was hired, he hired away the SDSU defensive coordinator Danny Gonzalez and the cornerbacks coach Tony White, and he was praising, I guess, or giving thanks to SDSU head coach Rocky Long for allowing him to go and get those guys. So when you see it, I was asking some of the players today, and they said the defense is is pretty much the same thing, just a few different stunts and tells here. But yeah, it's pretty much the same thing, and I think that's going to help them so much because they were saying how hard that defense is to go against if you only have 3 days to prepare. But they've had months, and that's going to really help them. And I would not be surprised if Danny Gonzalez is talking and going maybe into some of these offensive meeting rooms and saying, here's the personnel you guys need to look at. Here's exactly what they're going to do. Here's some of the things that you might need to look for. The interesting thing is that Gonzalez, even though he was the defensive coordinator, I don't think he called like any plays. It's mostly a job that's been handled by Rocky Long through his entire tenure there at SDSU. And so while Gonzalez knows pretty much every play and pretty much all the personnel, I don't know if he's going to know exactly what plays and what is kind of under their sleeve, because that's kind of all Rocky Long, and he never really had a chance to do that at SDSU. But there is definitely a lot of familiarity there, and that's going to help ASU a lot.
So, Jordan, it would sound like normally that this would be a trap game, because you're facing a top 15 team in Michigan State from the Big Ten, and you get the monumental win, and then you turn around and face a group of 5. But the loss last season should be a motivation to get their attention that San Diego State can play.
There's also no Rashad Penny program that helps them.
What's that?
There's also no Rashad Penny. I think he went off for well over 200 yards against him last season. So that's a plus for ASU.
All right. Jordan K on the line from Rivals. Devil's Digest is the platform right there. So please check out the work right there. Is there anything in particular that you guys are working on this week that we can look out for?
Just some film studies kind of about how ASU can exploit SDSU both on offense and defense, and stuff about the connection, obviously, with Tony White and Danny Gonzalez facing their old team.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Not only subscribe to the YouTube channel, but also subscribe to my weekly newsletter, The Voice of College Football. So send your email to MarkRogersTV@gmail, and we'll get you on next week's newsletter. Also, it has to be somewhat satisfying, at least at this point. Again, 2 games out of 12, but there's some struggles cross-state. If you haven't noticed, Jordan, you've got a Heisman Trophy candidate preseason, then you've got a quarterback guru of sorts, and that seemed like the logical hire, and then you've got the illogical hire, and you've got a 2-0 versus not just an 0-2, but a very ugly 0-2 there at Arizona.
Yeah, I can definitely tell you that people in Tempe are relishing the fact that they are 0-2, and those 2 losses have not looked good for U of A. But yeah, it's been very interesting to see how much struggle Khalil Tate's had on the ground. I don't know if it's the reason that all these coaches have a half year over a film on him, or if it's something that him and Sumlin maybe haven't worked out yet. I'm not sure. I haven't watched enough of their games and enough of their film to figure that out, but it's definitely something that I'm going to be keeping an eye out for, and seeing if they'll be able to kind of right the ship there with Khalil Tate.
Well, I had planned on catching the game. I had other games that I wanted to see at noon Eastern time this past week, so I put it on DVR, but it was like, why the bother? It was 38-0. So I don't know that you really need to see too much when you see that the most heralded dynamic running quarterback in the nation is put together with an offensive mind that's supposed to be one of the best in the game, and they're held without a touchdown or a point until it's meaningless. 38-0 after losing at home to BYU the week before. In addition to that, Arizona fans have to be a little concerned, or a lot concerned, that at the end of last season, after Tate went on this remarkable 1,200-yard run for 6 weeks, the last 3 opponents held him in check and made him throw it. And now, through 2 games, he has 22 yards rushing in 2 games. Against not great defenses, decent defenses, Houston in particular. But, it's not off to a good start, and things change. And again, it's only 2 games, but it's very interesting how that's played out versus the exact comparison right in state with what seemed like an odd hire at the time that may not work out. But
Yeah.
that's why they play the games. I think, Jordan, is why they say that, right?
Yes. Yes.
And of course, the other comment that comes to mind when you were talking about the strategy near the end of the game and not necessarily scoring points,
Mhm.
but this is, you play to win the game. You don't play
Yes.
to score
Exactly.
points. You play to win the game.
I was a little surprised that that comment hasn't come out yet, but in due time, I'm sure it'll make its way.
That's it. Jordan K from Devil's Digest. It's the Rivals platform for Arizona State. You can hear the insight. You can hear the knowledge right here as Jordan helps us out with Arizona State football. So please join the Rivals platform right there. And of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be back in just a few minutes with Alabama football talk with Stephen M. Smith from Touchdown Alabama. Jordan, we appreciate the time. It's always a learning experience for me and a good insight into Arizona State football.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to be back. Thank you.